A child in a wheelchair approaches a fierce rescued lion, and something magical happens. When their wounded souls meet, instinct gives way to compassion in a moment that defies science. This story of unlikely connection between two beings marked by suffering will forever change what we know about empathy. Prepare to witness when innocence tames the wild. Subscribe, leave your like, and comment where you're watching from. The autumn sun cast its last golden rays over the San Diego Zoo as Simba's powerful roar echoed through the corridors, causing visitors to instinctively recoil, pressing themselves against the walls like dry leaves swept by the wind. Everyone, except for a diminutive figure in a metallic wheelchair moving with determination along the paved path, her wheels creating a hypnotic rhythm against the rough concrete. Emily was only 8 years old, but her honey-colored eyes carried a depth that defied her age, as if each day lived counted for two. Each pain endured added layers of understanding that ordinary children would never know. Michael, her father, walked a few steps behind, his calloused hands gripping the chair's handles with the strength of someone trying to control the uncontrollable. At 35, he carried premature wrinkles that told stories of sleepless nights and constant worries. The smell of hospital disinfectant still clung to his clothes, a reminder of that morning's doctor's appointment, another in an endless sequence that had begun 2 years earlier when a drunk driver turned a routine trip to school into a battle for survival. The zoo represented a rare oasis of normalcy in their lives, a place where Emily could simply be a child, marveling at the natural world, where Michael could momentarily lower the hypervigilant guard he had maintained since the accident. He planned each visit with military precision, memorizing every access, ramp, every adapted restroom, every possible obstacle that could frustrate his daughter. His chronic anxiety, which before the accident was merely a background murmur in his life, now roared as loud as the lion they had just heard. The air carried the peculiar aroma of damp straw mixed with the wild scent of animals, a combination that always made Emily smile. She inhaled deeply, as if she could absorb all the vitality of the place through her lungs. Groups of children ran excitedly along the main path, their shouts of joy puncturing the air like off-key but sincere musical notes. Exhausted parents dragged strollers and heavy backpacks while dating couples took advantage of the shaded nooks to exchange furtive caresses. Amidst the crowd, a figure caught Michael's attention. Sarah, the zoo's new veterinarian, was organizing a group of visitors for the next educational talk. Her brown hair tied in a practical ponytail swayed as she gestured animatedly, explaining something about animal behavior. Michael had already noticed her on previous visits, always admiring from afar her evident passion for her work and the kindness with which she treated both animals and visitors. Emily, with the typical child's insight, had already noticed her father's furtive glances. "Daddy, I want to see the Lion King," Emily insisted, her voice carrying that unwavering determination Michael knew so well. It was the same voice she had used during months of painful physical therapy, the same one she employed when well-meaning doctors suggested limits she refused to accept. She pointed to the big cat area, where a crowd indicated something special was happening. Michael hesitated for a moment, mentally calculating the distance, the terrain, the potential difficulties. This habit of anticipating problems had become as automatic as breathing. But the sparkle in Emily's eyes, that light no accident could extinguish, overcame his reservations. He adjusted his grip on the chair's handles and began navigating through, the crowd murmuring polite apologies as he made his way. The big cat area was especially busy due to the annual conservation festival. Colorful flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, and stands sold souvenirs whose profits would go towards preservation projects. The sound of a local band playing folk music created a festive atmosphere that contrasted with the usual solemnity of the zoo. It was then that they saw him. Simba rested on his elevated platform like a bored monarch observing subjects unworthy of his attention. Even lying down, his presence was imposing. The dark mane framed his face like a crown of shadows, and powerful muscles rippled under the golden fur with every minimal movement. But it was the scars that told the true story. white lines snaking across his right flank, memories etched into the flesh of years of suffering in an illegal circus. Dr. Smith, the chief biologist in charge of the big cats, conducted his educational talk while maintaining a respectful distance from the protective grate. At 50, with graying hair and glasses that constantly slid down his nose, he possessed that rare combination of deep knowledge and ability to communicate complexities in an accessible way. This magnificent predator is still adapting to his new environment, he explained, gesturing with his aged hands. Simba was rescued 6 months ago from deplorable conditions. Please maintain distance from the protective grates. His temperament is still unpredictable. Emily listened attentively, her small fingers drumming on the arms of her chair to a rhythm. Only she understood. Michael noticed the pattern. It was the same one she used when she was processing important information, filing away details in her extraordinarily sharp mind. The girl possessed a remarkable capacity for observation, perhaps developed as compensation for her limited mobility, perhaps simply part of who she had always been. Dr. Smith continued his explanation about the rehabilitation process for traumatized, wild animals. But Emily was no longer paying attention to the words. Her eyes were fixed on Simba, and something passed between them. A silent recognition that defied logical explanation. The lion, who until then had completely ignored the human presence, moved his head slightly, his amber eyes meeting the girls, across the distance and barriers. Sarah approached the group, carrying a bucket with vitamin supplements that would be added to Simba's next meal. Michael felt his heart quicken slightly as she passed them, leaving in the air a subtle trail of floral perfume mixed with the characteristic scent of someone who works with animals. She greeted Emily with a warm smile, recognizing her from previous visits. "Hi, Emily, did you come to see our new resident?" Sarah asked, kneeling to be at the girl's level. Michael admired the gesture. Few people bothered to adjust their posture when talking to Emily, preferring to talk over her head as if she were invisible. Emily nodded enthusiastically. "He's beautiful, but he's sad," she observed with that disconcerting frankness of children. "I can see it in his eyes. It's like when Daddy thinks I'm not looking." Michael felt the blush rise up his neck. Sarah cast him an understanding look, before turning her attention back to Emily. "You're right. Simba has been through a lot of difficulties, but we're doing everything to make him feel safe and happy here." The conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion. A group of teenagers, running not to miss the seal show that was about to begin, accidentally bumped into Emily's chair. The impact wasn't strong, but enough to move the chair a few feet, bringing it dangerously close to the safety barrier. "Sorry, miss," one of the teenagers mumbled, awkwardly trying to reposition the chair. In their haste and embarrassment, they ended up leaving it even closer to the grate than it was originally. The teenagers disappeared into the crowd before Michael could protest. Emily, fascinated by the unexpected proximity to Simba, didn't call out to her father. Her silence had always been her peculiar form of rebellion against the constant overprotection. She knew she had only seconds before Michael noticed and pulled her away, so she took advantage of the moment to observe the lion more closely. She could now see details that escaped from a distance: the rough texture of the scars, the way one of his ears was slightly droopy, probably due to an old injury. Simba, until then indifferent to visitors, abruptly raised his head. His amber eyes fixed directly on Emily with an intensity that made the surrounding air feel denser. A tense silence settled between the motionless girl and the now alert predator. It was as if the rest of the world had disappeared, leaving only the two wounded beings recognizing each other mutually. The first visitors to notice the situation began to murmur anxiously. A woman let out a muffled scream, pointing to the dangerous proximity. The murmuring quickly turned into a wave of concern that spread through the crowd like ripples on a lake. Michael was paying for 2 ice creams at a nearby stand, momentarily distracted by the task of balancing the cones in his wallet, while the vendor looked for change. It was the sudden silence of the crowd that alerted him, that kind of stillness that precedes storms or tragedies. He turned, the ice creams falling, from his hands and splattering on the ground when he saw where Emily was. Emily. The scream tore from his throat with primal force. Years of repressed fear, of nightmares about losing his daughter, exploded in that single moment. He dropped everything and ran, ignoring the shouts of warning around him. Sarah was one of the first to react professionally. She dropped the bucket of supplements and ran towards Dr. Smith, who abandoned his lecture in the middle of a sentence about territorial behavior. "Code yellow at enclosure 7, she shouted into the radio, her voice maintaining a trained calm that contrasted with the rising panic around her. "Nobody move suddenly," Dr. Smith instructed, his voice carrying the authority of decades of experience. "Security, hold the perimeter. Medical team, stand by." His mind quickly calculated the options as he watched Simba rise slowly, his powerful muscles rippling under his fur. Michael was intercepted by 2 burly security guards when he was yards from his daughter. He fought them with superhuman strength fueled by despair. "She can't move fast, you don't understand," he yelled, tears streaming down his face as he tried to break free. "She's my baby, please." Emily remained supernaturally calm throughout the chaos. Her small hands rested calmly in her lap and her eyes never left Simba's. It was as if she were in a trance, or perhaps in a communication that transcended words and logic. Later, she would describe the feeling as being wrapped in a bubble of silence where only she and the lion existed. The zoo emergency team took strategic positions. 2 sharpshooters with tranquilizer darts aimed carefully, just waiting for the order to act. Veterinarians prepared medical equipment for any eventuality. Visitors were quickly evacuated from the area, some protesting, wanting to film the incident, others fleeing in panic. The world seemed to collectively hold its breath when Simba began to move. Each step of the big cat reverberated like thunder. In the tense silence, his massive paws touched the ground with lethal grace and his mane swayed like dancing shadows. The scars on his flanks seemed to pulse under the setting sun, telling silent stories of pain and survival. Sarah grabbed Dr. Smith's arm. "Doctor, we have to do something," she whispered urgently. But the biologist was paralyzed, watching something that defied all his scientific training. "Wait," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Something is happening here." When Simba reached the grate, the unthinkable happened. Instead of the threatening roar everyone feared, instead of extended claws and exposed fangs, the powerful cat did something that left even the most experienced handlers speechless. He slowly lowered his majestic head until it was level with Emily's wheelchair, his movements deliberate and careful, like a mother with her cub. A sound began to emanate from the lion's massive chest, not a roar, not a warning growl, but something that impossibly resembled a purr. It was a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone present, carrying with it an ancient message of recognition and compassion. Emily, ignoring the muffled screams of horror around her, slowly extended her small hand through the safety grate. Michael felt his heart stop, time freezing in that terrible moment between life and death. But instead of tearing the girl's hand off with a bite, Simba gently brushed his enormous head against her fingers, closing his eyes like a house cat receiving affection. "Impossible," Dr. Smith finally found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "In 25 years in this career, I've never..." He couldn't finish the sentence, words failing before the mystery unfolding. Sarah was the first to recover from the shock. With careful movements not to startle either the lion or the child, she slowly approached. "Emily, darling," she whispered softly, "can you slowly pull your hand back, just to make sure everyone stays safe?" Emily looked at Sarah, then at Simba, and finally at her father, who had stopped struggling against the security guards and was now openly weeping. "He won't hurt me," she said with absolute conviction. "He knows what it's like, we both do." Reluctantly, Emily withdrew her hand. Simba remained by the grate for a few more moments, his eyes still fixed on the girl before slowly moving away and returning to his platform. He lay down facing Emily like a silent guardian and didn't move for the rest of the day. The chaos that followed was controlled but intense. Paramedics examined Emily, who cooperated with thinly veiled impatience. Michael hugged his daughter hard enough to break ribs, alternating between relief, anger, and astonishment. Visitors were interviewed, reports were filed, and safety protocols were urgently reviewed. But it was Sarah who made the observation that would change everything. While helping calm Michael, offering him water and a place to sit, she mentioned something she had noticed. "The way Simba moved," she said thoughtfully. "Did you notice he was limping slightly? Very subtle, but it was there." Dr. Smith, overhearing the conversation, frowned. "That wasn't in the rescue vet reports. We'll need to do more detailed exams. If there's an undiagnosed injury." The revelation came 3 days later. After a battery of tests, Simba, surprisingly, tolerated without the usual need for heavy sedation. X-rays and MRIs revealed what years of abuse had hidden: an old spinal injury that partially limited his movements, though almost imperceptible to casual observers. "It's incredible he survived in the circus with that condition," explained the chief veterinarian during an emergency meeting. "The pain must have been constant. He learned to compensate so well that no one noticed." The news spread quickly, first among the zoo staff, then to the scientific community, and finally to the media. The miraculous encounter, as it was nicknamed, became the subject of heated discussions at ethology and animal psychology conferences. Theories were proposed and debated, from electromagnetic fields to interspecies telepathy. But for Emily, the explanation was simple. During a carefully supervised interview for a documentary about the incident, she articulated with the disconcerting clarity that characterized her. "When you're broken, you recognize others who are too. It's like a secret club nobody wants to be in. But when you're there, you just know." Michael watched his daughter during these interviews with a mix of pride and pain. The incident had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. In a session with the psychologist he'd started seeing after the event, he admitted, "I spent so much time trying to shield her from the world that I didn't realize I was stifling her strength. Emily doesn't need me to keep her in a bubble. She needs me to help her navigate the world as she is." The zoo, responding to overwhelming public interest and the demonstrated therapeutic potential, began developing a revolutionary program. Sarah, promoted to coordinator of the new initiative, worked tirelessly to create protocols that allowed safe interactions between children with special needs and rescued animals. "It's not just about the therapeutic benefits for the children," she explained during a presentation for potential sponsors, with Michael and Emily in the front row. "The animals benefit too." Simba showed remarkable improvements in his behavior since he started interacting regularly with Emily and other children in the program. Emily's weekly visits to the zoo became a sacred ritual. Always on Wednesdays, at 3 in the afternoon, she and Michael arrived for their special session. A specially installed safety glass allowed proximity without risk, and Simba invariably was waiting, lying as close to the barrier as possible. During these visits, something began to blossom between Michael and Sarah. It started with conversations about the program, discussions about Emily's progress and Simba's behavior. Sarah admired Michael's dedication as a father, while he marveled at her passion and professional competence. Small gestures were the first signs: an extra cup of coffee brought without asking, a lingering touch when passing documents. Emily, always observant, was the first to comment. "Sarah likes you, Dad," she announced during dinner one night, making Michael choke on his pasta. "And you like her too. Your eyes get different when she's around." Michael tried to protest, but Emily was relentless. "It's good. You smile more, like Simba when he sees me." The first truly significant moment between Michael and Sarah happened during an unexpected storm. They had gotten stuck at the zoo after closing hours, waiting for the rain to subside. Emily slept in her chair, exhausted after a particularly active day. Sitting in Sarah's office, drinking tea and listening to the rain drum on the roof, they shared stories. Michael spoke about his wife, killed in the same accident that injured Emily, about the guilt of having survived unharmed while the two most important people in his life suffered so much, about the constant fear of failing as a father, of not being enough for Emily. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally touching his hand in silent comfort. When it was her turn, She spoke about her own loss, a younger brother with cerebral palsy who had died years before, and how that had directed her career towards working with vulnerable beings. The rain had stopped when they realized their hands were clasped across the table. It was a moment of mutual recognition, not unlike what had happened between Emily and Simba, two wounded hearts recognizing in each other the possibility of healing. In the following weeks, the relationship evolved naturally. Sarah began joining Michael and Emily for some dinners. Michael started helping as a volunteer in the zoo program. Emily watched it all with thinly veiled satisfaction, occasionally making innocent comments that made the adults blush. The therapeutic interaction program grew rapidly. Children from all over the region were brought for carefully supervised sessions. Not all connections were as dramatic as Emily and Simba's, but every small step forward was celebrated. An autistic girl who hadn't spoken in years said her first words to a rescued macaw. A boy with partial paralysis regained motivation for physical therapy after interacting with a horse that had survived a fire. Dr. Smith, initially skeptical, became one of the program's biggest advocates. During an international conference, he presented preliminary data that suggested measurable benefits for both the children and the participating animals. "We are only scratching the surface of what is possible when we approach healing holistically," he declared to an audience of fascinated scientists. But not everything was easy success. There were setbacks and challenges. One day, Simba refused to leave his shelter, remaining huddled in the furthest corner. Emily was devastated, convinced she had done something wrong. It was Sarah who comforted her, explaining that even the strongest have tough days. "Simba is learning that it's safe to show when he's not okay," she said, hugging Emily. "That's progress too. He trusts us enough to show his vulnerability." The insight led to a deep conversation between Emily and Michael that night. She admitted that sometimes she pretended to be okay when she wasn't, afraid of worrying him even more. Michael, in turn, acknowledged that his own fear had created an atmosphere where Emily felt she needed to be too strong for her age. From that day on, they established a new ritual. Every night before bed, each shared one thing that had been difficult that day and one that had brought light. It was simple but transformative, allowing both to be fully human with each other. The first major test of Michael and Sarah's relationship came when a tabloid newspaper published an article questioning the program's safety, implying negligence and imminent danger. Despite being unfounded, the accusations generated a storm of controversy. Parents withdrew their children from the program. Sponsors threatened to withdraw funds. Michael found Sarah weeping in her office after a particularly brutal meeting with the zoo board. Without hesitation, he wrapped her in his arms, murmuring words of comfort. It was in that moment of shared vulnerability that they exchanged their first declarations of love. "We'll fight for this together," Michael promised. "This program, all of this changed our lives. We won't let lies destroy something so important." The battle was arduous. Meetings with lawyers, public awareness campaigns, emotional testimonies from beneficiary families. Emily, with Michael's careful permission, recorded a video that went viral, explaining with childlike eloquence what the program meant to her and other children. The tide turned when a team of respected documentary filmmakers, who had followed the program from the beginning, released a film showing the reality behind the sensationalist headlines, scenes of children blossoming, animals recovering, and the tireless dedication of the zoo staff moved the public. Simba, unaware of the political storm around him, continued his own healing process. His aggressive episodes decreased dramatically. He began interacting positively with other lions at the zoo, something considered impossible when he arrived. Veterinarians noted improvements in his physical condition, attributed both to medical treatment and improved emotional well-being. The emotional climax came during the celebration of the program's first anniversary. The zoo organized a special Iwaida event, inviting all participating families, sponsors, and the media. It was during the ceremony that Michael did something that surprised everyone, especially Emily. He had prepared a speech about the program, but at the moment to speak, he changed. His mind, Instead, he turned to Sarah, who was by his side on the stage, and knelt. The silence that followed was absolute, reminiscent of that first moment between Emily and Simba. "Sarah, you came into our lives when we most needed light. You showed us that broken doesn't mean irreparable. That love can blossom in the most unexpected places." His voice trembled with emotion. "Emily and I would like to know if you would agree to officially become part of our small but fierce family." Sarah's yes was muffled by her tears and the deafening applause of the crowd. Emily, on stage in her chair, radiated pure joy. When Sarah bent down to hug her, she whispered, "I told you he liked you." The wedding, 6 months later, was held at the zoo naturally. It was an intimate but deeply meaningful ceremony. Simba, in his enclosure specially decorated for the occasion, watched the proceedings with what Emily swore was approval in his amber eyes. During the vows, Michael spoke about how true love isn't the absence of fear, but the courage to be vulnerable. Despite it, Sarah spoke about how family isn't defined by blood or circumstance, but by the daily choice to care for one another. Emily, as maid of honor, stole the show with a speech about how sometimes the best things come from the scariest moments. The honeymoon was postponed. None of the three wanted to separate so soon. Instead, they took a weekend trip to the beach, where Emily experienced for the first time the feeling of floating in the sea with the help of special equipment. The expression of absolute freedom on her face as the waves rocked her was forever etched in her parents' memory. The zoo's program continued to grow and evolve. Researchers from prestigious universities began longitudinal studies on the effects of animal-human interaction in healing processes. Simba became an unwitting scientific celebrity, though he remained oblivious to his fame, preferring his quiet moments with Emily. There were difficult days, of course. Days when Emily's disability frustrated her beyond words. Days when Michael struggled with anxiety. Days when Sarah felt overwhelmed trying to balance her work with family life. But they had learned that faith isn't believing that bad days won't come, but trusting that the light always returns. A particularly touching moment occurred when Emily, now 10 years old, was invited to speak at a medical conference about her experience. Instead of focusing on her limitations, she spoke about how her wheelchair was her wings, allowing her to go places and meet extraordinary beings like Simba. "People always ask me if I'd like to walk again," she said to an audience of moved doctors. "Of course I would, but if I could go back in time and prevent the accident, and that meant never meeting Simba, never seeing Dad find Sarah, never helping all these children and animals, I wouldn't change a thing." Sometimes the hardest path leads to the most beautiful places. Dr. Smith, now a senior consultant for the expanded program, often used Emily and Simba's story in his lectures. "Animals and humans share more than we imagine," he would say. "The ability to recognize suffering in another being, to respond with compassion instead of indifference or aggression, that's what makes us truly alive." As the years passed, the bond between Emily and Simba remained strong. Even when other lions were introduced to the program, even when Emily made human friends through the group therapy sessions, that initial connection remained unique. Zoo staff reported that Simba always knew when it was Wednesday, becoming noticeably more alert on the mornings of Emily's visits. Sarah meticulously documented these observations, contributing to a growing body of literature on animal cognition and emotion. Her work, combined with the program data, began to shift perceptions in the scientific community about the depth of animal emotional experience. But beyond the academic papers and conferences, the real impact was visible in the transformed lives. Children who had lost hope found reasons to smile. Animals considered irrecoverable showed surprising capacity for trust and affection. Families fragmented by trauma found paths to healing. Michael, reflecting on the journey during the 5-year anniversary of the first encounter, marveled at the twists of fate. "If someone had told me on that terrible day in the hospital that our greatest pain would lead to our greatest joy, I wouldn't have believed it," he said to Sarah as they watched Emily leading a group of new children in the program. Sarah squeezed his hand, her wedding ring glinting in the sunlight. "Hope is like that. It grows in the cracks that pain leaves behind. The program faced continuous challenges. Funding was always a concern. Occasionally, animals or children didn't respond well to the program and needed different approaches. There were losses too. Some elderly animals passed away, leaving the children who had connected with them navigating grief. It was during one of these difficult moments that Emily demonstrated the depth of her emotional maturity. When a rescued eagle with whom a girl named Sophia had formed bonds died unexpectedly, Emily was the first to offer comfort. "You know," she said to Sophia, hugging her awkwardly from her wheelchair, "Eagle," as the eagle was affectionately called, taught us something important. She showed us that even with broken wings, we can touch the sky in someone's heart. That never dies. The makeshift memorial the children organized for Eagle became an annual event, celebrating all the animals that had passed through the program. It was a gentle reminder that love transcends loss, that meaningful connections leave permanent marks on our souls. Simba, now aging gracefully, remained the heart of the program. His arthritic joints made him slower, and he slept more than he was awake. But every Wednesday, without fail, he was at his post waiting for Emily. The girl, now a teenager, had changed physically, but the essence of their connection remained unchanged. During a particularly memorable visit, Emily brought her journal to read to Simba. It was a school project about life-changing moments, and she had chosen to write about their first encounter. As she read, her voice carrying through the specially installed speakers so Simba could hear her clearly, zoo staff stopped to listen. "Dear Simba," she read, "you taught me that courage isn't not having fear. It's reaching out even when everyone says it's dangerous. It's trusting that kindness is waiting on the other side of the bars we build. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for showing me that broken can be beautiful." Simba, as if he understood every word, slowly rose and walked to the glass. He pressed his forehead against the barrier, and Emily mirrored the gesture. In that moment, everyone present felt the sacred weight of witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the friendship between a girl and a lion, but the living proof that compassion knows no species. The final documentary about the program, released on the 10th anniversary, became a global phenomenon. It won prestigious awards and inspired similar programs in zoos around the world. But for Emily, Michael, and Sarah, the real prize were the everyday moments. Family dinners where Emily laughed at Michael's bad jokes. Saturday mornings at the Ija Zoo where Sarah taught Emily about animal behavior. Quiet evenings where the three simply existed together in comfortable silence. Their story became a legend at the zoo. New staff members were told about the day a girl in a wheelchair tamed not just a fierce lion, but the hearts of everyone who witnessed her courage. Visitors came expecting to see Simba, and always left with more than they expected. A lesson about resilience, about love, about the possibility of light even in the deepest darkness. And every Wednesday, as the sun set over the zoo and Emily said goodbye to Simba until the next week, the same question hung in the air like a blessing and a challenge. "And you, when will you let hope blossom in your desert?"